Neil Lazarus. Educating, motivating, challenging.
And welcome back. Another podcast and video blog, or whatever they call them nowadays, we have a great guest today with who is Joshua Hasten, who's the international spokesman for the Gush Etzion Regional Council. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
And I hope you're looking forward to the snow.
I certainly am. Here in Gush Etzion, we're supposed to get a lot of snow.
So let's get down to
forward to that.
Let's get down to business. Whenever you're on the speaking circuit, I'm on the speaking circuit, and we talk about the Middle East, the number one question is, if you ask them, what's the major cause of the conflict between Israelis and Palestinians? They always say the settlements. What would your answer be to that? Why are you not a bloc to peace? I mean, you're building in the West Bank. You're aggravating everybody.
Sure.
There's an increase in violence now, which is crazy. So you can't just blame Palestinians. There's settlers being violent. How do you address all of these claims?
So first of all, people need to remember, what we're talking about historically. The areas which are referred to as these settlements or the West Bank, this has been the heartland of the Jewish people for thousands of years. I mean, you can go back to stories from the Bible, and you could say that 70-80% of the stories took place in these regions, in these mountains where I'm sitting here in Gush Etzion and throughout Judea and Samaria. So we have a historical connection to this land. We have a modern day connection to this land, whether it's through legal means or the fact that we won these areas in the defensive war of survival in 1967, whether it's for security reasons. I mean, you take your pick. There's a significant reason why there are Jewish communities. We now have over 500,000 Jewish residents in these areas. If you include the neighborhoods in Jerusalem, which the world community views as, they call them illegal occupied settlements. You've heard these words. There are about 750,000 Jewish residents of these areas, and we're headed towards 1 million. So
okay, I understand what you're saying, but the reality is, I would argue that the left in Israel is naive about the Palestinians. It's like if you just got out of the West Bank, there would be peace. But I also I would argue people like you on the right are blind to Palestinians. You build, you get on with your life as if what you're doing has absolutely no consequence. We can talk about the legality of whether you're there or not, but the reality is the more and more you're building, the less likely there will be any form of agreement with the Palestinians.
I would disagree. I would say the more and more we build, the more of a chance there is for coexistence on a regular basis. And I see that here, 5 minutes from my house at the Gush Etzion Junction, where you have Jews and Arabs who are working together, shopping together. Arabs who work in Jewish communities in these areas have more opportunities for their families than under the Palestinian Authority. So I would disagree. I would say we are helping the cause of peace. You're not hindering the cause of peace. These communities in Judea and Samaria, the world is obsessed with them. There's an obsession with these communities. Anytime you build a kindergarten, anytime you build a nursery school, anytime you build a store or a house, it's scrutinized by the mainstream media. It's scrutinized by the State Department these days. It's scrutinized by the European Union, who, by the way, is funding an illegal campaign to try to take over strategic areas in what is known as Area C under full Israeli control. There is an obsession here. It's an anti-Israel obsession, and there are provocations. To answer your question about the violence going on, there are provocations taking place. I don't know if people realize this, on a weekly basis, where you have anarchists and extreme fringe, so-called, I don't even want to call them left-wingers, who approach Israeli communities, beating their drums, disturbing the Sabbath, okay? And, this happens on a weekly basis. And they are trying to...
Just before we move on to that. Look,
sure.
A couple of things. The problem is I live not far from you. I don't live in the West Bank. I drive through the West Bank every day. And I'm very familiar with the Gush Etzion area. Everyone you speak to in the Gush talks about Rami Levy and how Palestinians and Israel, right? You know and I know that the junction of which is there has actually been a major shooting range for Palestinian attacks. for years. So it's not quite as straightforward and pleasant, and everyone's getting on with each other as you know, the picture you paint. Second of all, is what we're actually seeing in the West Bank, and this is where I think the right is blind, is you're seeing a rise of violence by not all the settlers, but by the settlement movement, also with the Palestinians. So actually, what we're really seeing is the barometer's rising. What you're doing is living in a nice little house in the Gush, and you're blind to really what's going on the ground there. Is the only way forward is if there would be a freeze on settlements, stop building, get back to negotiations?
No, absolutely not, because the issue isn't Judea and Samaria. The issue really is Tel Aviv and Haifa and Jaffa and Akko. If you listen to the rhetoric coming out of not only Hamas, but the Palestinian Authority on a daily basis, whether it's in the media or in the education system, they're talking about taking over the entire country. They're not talking about Judea and Samaria. The PLO, initially when it was founded back in the day, by the way, 3 years, 1964, before there ever existed a so-called settlement, they vowed to destroy the state of Israel. They wanted nothing to do with places like Bet El and Efrat. They were talking about destroying the entire state of Israel, and that remains the same today. When you have rockets being fired out of Gaza, we've had thousands of rockets over the years, and Israel, of course, made a terrible mistake, in my opinion, pulling 10,000 Jews out of their homes in Gush Katif and throughout Gaza. Okay, and what did we get in return? An immediate response of an increase in rocket attacks by 500%. We've had 3 military operations. Any area where Israel relinquishes becomes a hotbed of terrorist activity. So if you say put a freeze or evacuate these communities, one day they will be taken over, perhaps initially by the Palestinian Authority, but ultimately Hamas, maybe ISIS, or who knows who else to the east of us could be coming over. So we are actually protecting the rest of the country from the strategic highlands where 75% of the Israeli community lives down below in the valley below. And you can see it from the outlook points here. I'm sure you know in Neve Daniel and other communities, you can see the beach in Ashdod. You can see the beach in Ashkelon from the community of Karmei Tzur. Imagine, and I brought Colonel Richard Kemp, who was in charge of British forces in Afghanistan. A few years ago, I brought him on a tour of Gush Etzion. We went up to that 1,000 meter outlook point, and I said, Colonel, in the age of ballistic missiles today, is it still important to have control of the high ground? He said 100% absolutely. So we are actually protecting the rest of the country. Imagine if Hamas was overlooking Ben Gurion International Airport. We saw what they did from Gaza in the last operation, firing on an airport, firing on Tel Aviv, the center of the country, or major population centers. You put a terrorist group on top of these mountains, you won't be able to have a country. It is a existential threat to the state of Israel if you relinquish these communities and turn them over to the PA.
The reality is, again, the simplicity of your argument is overwhelming because you talk Palestinians as if it's all one people. What's happening in Gaza is very different than what's happening in the West Bank. What I would argue is that the settlement movement may be, and this is the argument, is increasing the extreme movements within the Palestinians. Everyone refers back to the PLO and how it originated, and it was against the creation of the State of Israel. At the end of the day, if you're looking for a partner for peace, we have to look at moderates and on the Palestinian sides. Isn't the settlement movement pushing Palestinians further into the hands of Hamas?
No, absolutely not. Listen, this is the excuse, not the reason that there's violence coming out of the Palestinian Authority. And you mentioned the stabbing attacks. Yeah, they do exist. Again, 99% of the time, things are quiet in our communities and on our roads or whatnot. But unfortunately, we do have those terror attacks. But those are the excuses. You know, if you listen to the words of, let's say, Mahmoud Abbas, the head of the Palestinian Authority, and others in their media and whatnot, who essentially call for violence when they come up with these, I would call them blood libels. The Jews are storming the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. The Jews are doing X, Y, and Z. These are blood libels, and they are inciting the violence. It isn't our communities. It isn't the presence of Jews. I mean, you're essentially saying
What's your solution?
Wait, one second. You're saying if you create a Judenrein area, an area free of Jews, that will bring peace. I mean, that's ethnic cleansing the other way. there's no solution right now, and it's very simple. When people ask me, I talk to groups all the time, school groups, high school groups, college kids, left, right, center. I talk to them all the time, and I say very simple. You don't have to listen to what they're saying in the Knesset. You don't have to listen to what the officials and the leaders are saying. You need to listen to what's going on inside the education system, within the Palestinian Authority, within Hamas. If you read the textbooks that are put out by UNRWA, this is a UN organization, they are inciting to hate. They are telling these kids, the next generation of Arab youth, that you should hold on to your keys, and one day you will go back to Akko and Jaffa and Haifa. Essentially, you will destroy the state of Israel, and they are preaching that on a daily basis in schools. There will never be peace. There will never be peace here as long as the other side doesn't recognize the legitimacy of the state of Israel on any part of this land. They're not willing to give up 1 inch of this land, and there'll never be peace, unfortunately.
My question is, you say that there will never be peace if the Palestinians don't recognize the legitimate rights of Jews to be here. Okay, isn't it vice versa?
No, absolutely not. I have no problem with my Arab neighbors.
There's no recognition of the rights of the Palestinians. We hear people on the right saying that there's no such thing as a Palestinian people, that it's a fictitious nation, they're all Arabs. You have the rise of the likes of Ben Gvir, who provokes for the name of provocation. If there's going to be peace, it's going to be not necessarily between Israelis and Palestinians, but it will be between people who are willing to recognize each other. Why don't you recognize the Palestinians' right to be in the land?
Well, listen, Israel signed the Oslo Accords, and 90+% of the Palestinians live under the Palestinian Authority. So they live under that jurisdiction. I mean, I don't know what else. If you're talking about a state, I mean, this is the state of Israel. I don't think they need a
90% of the West Bank.
I don't think they.
Palestinian Authority is not 90% of the West Bank.
No. 90% of the Arabs living in this area are under the Palestinian Authority's control.
We're talking
That's
about
what
the
I said.
creation of a state.
So, no, the creation of the state is an existential threat to the state of Israel. If they want a state, they can have a state in Jordan. They can have a state in Syria. They can pick one of the other 22 Arab countries. This is the state of Israel, our one and only tiny state. And land for peace doesn't work. I mentioned it before. Anytime you relinquish land, you get rockets, you get terror attacks.
Gosh, we can talk over each other, but no one's going to hear this. Okay, so we need to take a breath in between somewhere along the line.
Sure.
But what you're talking there for is you're saying this is that they can go to Jordan, they can go everywhere else. But you're not, so therefore you're negating the right of Palestinians. They don't want, they're born here, they have their grandparents were here. What are you going to do? You want to put them on trains?
No, I never said that. But I said they should not have a state with an army, which would be an existential threat to the state of Israel. Okay. If my Arab neighbors want to live peacefully next to me, I have no problems with Arabs living in this area. Okay, and you can come, whether it's here or the Barkan industrial area. There is coexistence on the ground, which is ignored time and time again by the international media. It's not brought up. It's not mentioned. People want to focus. If it bleeds, it leads, and that's the case here. Okay, that doesn't mean that they deserve a state.
Josh, we are short of time. What right do you have as someone who grew up in the States to dispossess the Palestinians who can trace themselves back generations here?
I haven't dispossessed anybody. That's number one. And number two, I have a 3,000-year-old right. I'm an indigenous Jew from Judea. It's as simple as that. So if we want to play the game of who was here first and whatnot, my presence was here long before the Arab presence in this area. So if we want to play that game, if somebody says my grandfather was here, let your grandfather be here. So I'll say my great-great-great-great-grandfather was here. And after 2,000 years of wandering the globe, we have returned home to our ancestral homeland. We are the indigenous people to this area. And that's why we have the right to be here. I mean, so what is it, 30%? Go ahead.
I was going to say, bottom line, you see no answer. Is you're going to carry on building Palestine. There's no partner for peace. And thank you, Israel.
There's no partner for peace right now. When you preach hate education, and you teach your children the only good Jew is a dead Jew, and it's well documented. All you have to do is go to organizations like Palestinian Media Watch. You don't have to read their commentary. You can just read their translations from Arabic into English or into Hebrew and see and the next generation of Arab children is growing up in an environment from their mother's milk all the way up. They're being incited to hate Israel, to hate the Jewish people. And as long as that continues, I don't see any type of realistic peace plan or peace partner. That being said, again, I've said it already a few times, on a day-to-day basis, Jews and Arabs in this area get along, I would argue, get along better in this area than in other parts of the country where you have, 25% of the population have Israeli citizenship, those Arabs. I would say in this area, we get along even better than those areas. Unfortunately, because of that hate education, you do have the radicals who show up at the Gush Junction or the Tapuch Junction and try to murder men, women, and children. I've lost friends myself.
I understand that.
Numerous times.
You blame education. I think that education definitely has a role. But if we have a look at Israeli education, there's also a negation. And I'm not comparing it. I know that people do. I'm not comparing the same in and I would agree with you on the issue of incitement to violence in the Palestinian education. But there is a negation of Palestinian peoplehood in Israeli education. Israeli kids won't really learn about the refugee, 700,000 refugees of 1948. They won't talk about 400 Palestinian villages which were destroyed in the War of Independence. So there's a negation on the Israeli side as well as the Palestinian side.
So what you're saying is you're saying you're questioning Israel's moral right to exist and on any borders?
What I'm saying is I agree with you, education is the basis, but I think that Israeli education as well as Palestinian education will need to be changed.
I can't, you said it yourself, I don't think you can make any type of comparison between hate education and perhaps an education which is lacking. I don't think you can make a comparison between. I'm not making a comparison between the two.
Israeli, I'm not making that comparison. What I am saying is Israeli will also change. Need to change.
If you look at what Israel has done in terms of making gestures, whether they were right or wrong, and I would argue many of them are wrong, as compared to the phony promises of peace by Yasser Arafat and the like, who said they wanted to sign a deal and in reality launched a war of terror against the Jewish people. I think you can see the difference between what Israelis, whether it's the leadership or whether it's the education or the next generation growing up, in terms of what they're being taught and what Israel has sacrificed. Again, I think mistakenly because of what's going on the other side. I don't think there's any type of, I think it's night and day when you see the two sides, and the education system and the desire for peace, which you see coming out of Israel. Some leaders going way, way too far, in my opinion, trying to reach deals with terrorists.
Well, you're touching on, because your opinion is one opinion within Israeli society. There's many Israelis who would disagree with you. And sit in the government, by the way, Yeah, I mean, what would you say to not to those people who are from abroad saying, "Hey, the settlements are a block to peace"? What do you say to Israelis who would say, "Why should we pay to subsidize and help the settlement movement when really the money which goes into the settlement movement should be used to strengthen institutions within Israel? Why should the settlement movement be a national priority?"
Again, I said it before. I would say that unless you want rockets on a daily basis falling on your homes in Herzliya and Petah Tikva and Tel Aviv, I would strengthen Israel's control from a security perspective over these areas. Whether you're a Bible-believing Jew or an atheist or whoever you are, if you don't believe in our historical rights, which I do believe in our historical rights and our legal rights to these areas, if you don't want to run to the bomb shelters, which unfortunately the people of Sderot and not a settlement have to do and have had to do since 2001. I mean, you have entire generations growing up under rocket fire, which is preposterous. Those in the center of the country, if you don't want to be like Sderot, then you should support us up here on the highlands, protecting you down below.
Joshua, thank you very much for joining us. It's never enough time to speak.
If you like this, why not invite Neil Lazarus to speak at your synagogue, church, or school? Check out his website, awesomeseminars.com.